They ended my 22-year career in one meeting, because I refused to sign off on the deaths of 16 men. I remember the sound of the waves hitting steel more than I remember my ex-wife's voice. That constant rhythmic thrum, metal and ocean locked in a duel just below my boots, was the backdrop to half my life. The other half? A clipboard, a red pen, and a nagging instinct that had saved more lives than anyone at Ardent Corps would care to admit. My name's Frank Dalton. I was the senior safety inspector for Oceanfall Platform 4, one of the deepest rigs Ardent Corps Energy ever threw into the Gulf. And if you believe what the suits at HQ say, I was also the biggest obstacle to progress this side of Port Halifax. 10 years on this rusted beast, and 22 total in offshore drilling. You don't last that long unless you learn two things: how to keep your mouth shut until it matters, and how to tell when someone wants you gone. Tyler Connors arrived with polished boots and a plastic grin. He was everything you'd expect from a Houston desk man forced onto the sea: a few buzzwords, a 1,000-yard stare from staring too long at spreadsheets, and no scars. The kind of guy who called everyone boss, but never listened to anyone without a title. I met him on the main deck the day he flew in. I extended a gloved hand, told him where the wind liked to bite and which valves were temperamental when the humidity spiked. He nodded politely, then walked past me like I was a damn janitor. Didn't take long for the whispers to start. Dalton's too slow. Old school. He's got the paperwork disease. He thought I didn't hear the things he said behind closed doors. Dalton's a relic, he once told a junior engineer in the break room, not knowing I was 2 feet away behind the door frame. Keeps this rig crawling like it's the 80s. A week later, I flagged a high-pressure valve on the southeast injector. Minor hairline scoring on the housing, but I knew better than to call anything minor out here. Metal fatigue doesn't give a damn about your production schedule. We need to shut it down, I told the lead tech. 3 hours, tops. Get the diagnostics clean. Word reached Tyler within 10 minutes. He summoned me up to the meeting room, a glass-walled fishbowl they'd installed last year to make middle management feel important. I walked in with my clipboard. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 operations coordinators and a data analyst. All in fresh coveralls. All younger than the boots I was wearing. Frank, Tyler said, voice smooth like cold soup, do you know where Oceanfall ranks in production output this month? I don't keep track of pissing contests, I replied. He forced a smile, then flipped his tablet around. A graph, red line descending. We're 6th. Out of 7. You know what our margin is this quarter? You know what the shareholders are breathing down our necks for? I tapped the clipboard in my hand. To not send body bags back to Galveston. His smile twitched. He leaned forward. Look, I respect your experience, I do. But this isn't about paranoia. It's about balancing risk. Calculated, controlled risk. You shutting down injection for 3 hours over surface scuffing? That's micromanagement disguised as safety. I flipped to the page I'd already prepped. Scoring depth is 0.34 millimeters. Stress testing threshold is 0.25. That valve fails under sustained pressure in under 90 minutes. We're 0.09 millimeters into deadman territory. He blinked. One of the engineers shifted in their seat. I pushed the sheet forward. You want to run this with a ticking pipe? Be my guest. But sign your name next to mine. Make it official. Tyler didn't take the sheet. Instead, he reclined in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said, you know, Frank, you've written more incident reports this year than the other 4 platforms combined. At some point, that starts looking less like caution and more like self-preservation. I stared at him, long and hard. The day you lose sleep over a man's funeral instead of a spreadsheet is the day I'll start listening to your gut. Silence. He waved a hand at the coordinators. We're done here. I stood up, left the report on the table, and walked out without a word. But as I stepped into the stairwell and looked out across the windswept deck, I felt something shift in the air. Not the pressure. Not the steel. Something colder. Like the first step onto a frozen lake. Not cracking yet, but close. That meeting didn't end my career. Not officially. But it started the countdown. And I could feel it in my bones. The morning after the meeting, the rig felt different. Maybe it was just me. Maybe once you're marked, the shadows grow teeth and the wind whispers things that were always there, just louder now. But I knew better. Paranoia was a luxury. I dealt in patterns, and patterns were starting to crack. That day, I made my rounds twice. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been shifted while I slept. First stop was Module C2, where they'd been replacing a worn valve on the secondary coolant line. Standard maintenance, scheduled and logged. But when I lifted the new unit's housing plate, my gut twisted. It was the wrong color. Not the soft brushed steel of our usual manufacturer, but a cheap matte finish, almost dull gray. I checked the stamp, Charleston ETX. Not approved. Not on our vendor list. Not on any API-compliant list I'd ever seen. I radioed the maintenance crew chief. No answer. 5 minutes later, I found Miguel, good tech, solid guy for years, smoking behind the hydraulic tanks. He flinched when I mentioned the valve. That's what supply sent, he said, not meeting my eyes. Came in the last shipment. I assumed it was cleared. You assumed? I asked. Miguel rubbed his temple. Look, I don't know, man. Ever since Tyler came in, we've been getting gear I've never seen before. New vendors. No specs attached. Just install orders. Fast. Quiet. He looked at me then, something like guilt, or fear, in his eyes. I didn't press him. I just said, if I find another part like that, I'm filing an official deviation report. His mouth opened like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded, stubbed out the cigarette, and walked off. I didn't believe for a second this was just bad logistics. So I dug deeper. Back in my quarters, I opened up the equipment log archive, something Tyler's people thought was above my clearance. I still had backdoor access from the old days. I knew where the skeletons lived. While cross-checking the last 3 weeks of part numbers against the approved equipment list, I found 9 other entries with suspicious supplier codes. And every single one had a signed-off inspection, but no actual data logs attached. They were ghost certifications. I started documenting everything, photos, serials, timestamps. Then I moved to the sensor archive to check pressure readings from the last 2 weeks. And that's when I saw it. A cluster of spikes, short bursts of high-pressure anomalies that didn't match the load profiles. Too brief to trigger alarms, but long enough to suggest serious overdrive. I aligned them against production logs. Every time Tyler increased output quotas, the spikes followed. That shouldn't have been possible. The safety systems were designed to adjust within tolerance limits. These weren't slow fluctuations. These were violent surges, pressure slamming against the edge of what the system could take. The kind of thing that, if sustained, would peel steel like paper. And no one else had flagged it. Which meant either no one saw it, or someone buried it. Just to be sure, I ran a manual diagnostic trace, line by line, through the sensor arrays. That's when I found it. Tucked in the auxiliary logs of the lower hull, buried in archived modules no longer active, was an old secondary pressure sensor, Unit PZ-9. It shouldn't have been online. The entire sector had been decommissioned last year during the pipeline overhaul. But it was transmitting. Not to the main console. Not to Houston. To a private node. An encrypted one. I stared at the log. Whoever was listening wasn't on the platform's official systems. And they were watching more closely than anyone else. PZ-9 had been quietly tracking pressure anomalies, most of which had been purged from the standard data logs. It was a second set of eyes. One someone forgot to unplug. Or maybe, someone never meant to. The next 3 hours, I went ghost. No radio. No clipboard. Just my boots, a flashlight, and the gut-deep chill of knowing I wasn't alone in seeing this. I traced the hard line from PZ-9 down 2 levels into a maintenance shaft. The line had been spliced, rerouted into a secondary relay junction that looked old, dusty, forgotten. But the splice was new. Fresh tape. Clean cuts. Someone had done this within the past 6 months. Someone on this rig. I didn't know what scared me more, that someone had been secretly monitoring the pressure spikes, or that they weren't warning anybody. What was the goal? Cover up? Insurance? Blackmail? Dead men don't testify. I'd seen it before. I climbed out of the shaft, gloves dirty, sweat beading under my collar. On the way back to the operations bay, I ran into Jason Turner, one of the junior techs I'd mentored since he joined 2 years ago. Bright kid. Trusted him. He jumped a little when he saw me. Frank, didn't expect you down here. I could say the same. He glanced at the shaft behind me. Just routine maintenance. Yeah, I lied. You. Routing calibration logs for ops. Tyler's orders. I nodded. How's he treating you? Jason hesitated. He runs a tight ship. That pause said more than the sentence. We parted ways, but I kept glancing back as I walked. Jason had always been sharp. Loyal. But lately, his reports had gone vague. His behavior twitchier. Either he was being watched, or he was watching me. Or worse. I made it back to my quarters, locked the door, and sat down hard on the cot. Whoever wired that sensor wasn't just tracking pressure. They were tracking intent. Behavior. Maybe even evidence. And if that's true, then I was no longer the only one keeping a file. But I had a head start. And now I knew what to look for. Pressure doesn't lie. It doesn't play favorites, doesn't compromise, doesn't skip a warning just because you're on deadline. You give steel the wrong load at the wrong moment, and it'll rupture like bone under a sledge. And when the system meant to prevent that kind of failure starts bleeding, you don't ask questions. You shut it all down. I was in the subdeck diagnostics bay when I saw it, dark fluid pooling under the base of the blowout preventer's hydraulic housing. At first, I thought it was leftover coolant. But the color was too dark. Too thick. I dipped 2 fingers into the puddle. Hydraulic oil. Not just oil, oil laced with metallic flakes. Microscopic at first glance, but under the handheld magnifier, I could see the shimmer. Steel dust. The BOP is the last line of defense on any rig. You lose pressure integrity there, you don't get a warning shot. You get a catastrophe. 1 second you're drilling. The next, 16 men are dead, and the ocean bleeds crude for miles. I stood there for a full minute, just listening to the hiss of the pressure systems, the rhythmic thump of the stabilizers overhead. It was like the whole rig was whispering a countdown in a language only I understood. Then I did the one thing Tyler Connors never wanted me to do. I pulled the kill switch on the diagnostics network and flagged the system for full lock inspection. Within minutes, the deck lit up like a Christmas tree. Alerts rang across terminals. Drill supervisors came out of their chairs. Comm lines buzzed with questions. And Tyler came storming in like I'd slapped his mother. He found me in the control hub, standing beside Jason, who looked like he was trying to disappear into the floor. "What the hell is going on, Dalton?" Tyler demanded, voice rising over the hum of halted systems. I turned slowly, holding up the sealed container with the hydraulic sample. Oil from the BOP housing. Contaminated with metal shavings. Signs of internal erosion. He snatched the container, popped the lid, sniffed it like that would tell him anything. This thing was just serviced. I signed the work order myself. I know, I said. That's why we're here. The silence after that was sharp enough to cut skin. I'm initiating a complete system check, I continued. Lockout protocol on the BOP. No operations resume until we know whether your authorized maintenance used substandard parts, again. A few heads turned in the room. Eyes narrowing. Everyone knew. No one had said it. Yet. Tyler's jaw clenched. You don't have the authority to shut down the rig. I do when there's documented evidence of imminent system failure. His voice dropped to a hiss. That's not your call to make. Oh, but it is, I said, stepping closer. And here's the best part, Tyler, if this thing ruptures, your name's already on the maintenance log. Signed. Dated. You put your pen to it. The room froze. 12 crew members. All within earshot. All very aware of what this meant. Jason looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Tyler's eyes flicked to him, then to me. And in that instant, I saw it. The break. The moment when calculated calm gave way to something colder. He stepped forward until we were inches apart. The man was 3 inches taller, half a decade younger, but he didn't have what mattered. Not under the pressure. You just crossed a line, he said. I didn't blink. No. I just drew one. He didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. Instead, he smiled. That cold, shallow smile he wore when he was lining someone up with corporate. You're done, Dalton, he said. As of this moment, you're relieved of all duties. Your security clearance is revoked. You'll be on the outbound heli this evening. No hearing. No write-up. You endangered production and caused a panic in front of essential personnel. That's grounds for dismissal. He turned to the rest of the room. Effective immediately. Frank Dalton is no longer with this operation. The words hung there, heavy and final. But I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of a reaction. I stepped forward, slowly and deliberately, leaned in, and said in a voice only he could hear. You didn't fire me, Connors. You just signed your own death warrant. He blinked, taken off guard. I'm going to write everything down, I said. Every forged log. Every fake part. Every goddamn corner you cut to shave 3 cents off the budget. You think the company will cover for you? Maybe. But I'm not going away quietly. And I'm not alone. He recovered fast, that slick bastard. Leave the rig, Dalton. Or I'll have security escort you. I looked around at the crew, most of them frozen, caught in the crossfire. You don't have to like me, I told them. But when this thing blows, you'll remember who tried to stop it. And then I walked out. I packed my bag in silence. No one came to say goodbye. When the chopper blade started up at dusk, I didn't look back. I just stared into the horizon, salt mist on my face, the gulf stretching endless and unknowable, and underneath it all, the boiling truth that no one wanted to see. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea I was just getting started. I didn't sleep the night I got back to the mainland. Not because I was wired or angry, though I was both, but because for the first time in 22 years, I didn't know what came next. My duffel hit the floor of my dusty apartment like a coffin lid closing. I stood there in the doorway, looking at the life I barely remembered between rotations, cracked tile, unopened mail, a layer of dust that could pass for sediment. I showered, made a pot of coffee I never drank, and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure where to start. But I knew where it had to end. I spent the next 3 days poring over every piece of documentation I'd saved, snapshots of pressure readings, vendor serial numbers, photos of stamped parts that shouldn't exist. I reconstructed the paper trail Ardencourt had tried to erase. They could fire me, discredit me, but they couldn't scrub the truth, not while I still had it. On the fourth day, I sent a report to Ardencorps' Internal Safety Division and Human Resources. 20 pages of violations. 5 attachments. A subject line that read: Formal report, evidence of deliberate bypass of federal safety regulations on Ocean Fall Platform 4. I hit send and waited. 48 hours later, the response came, not from the Safety Division, not from HR, but from a man named Logan Ward, Ardencorps' senior legal counsel. The email was colder than a pressure bleed. Mr. Dalton, we have reviewed your documentation and found it to be both speculative and defamatory. Ocean Fall Platform 4 continues to operate within federally approved safety parameters. Your recent dismissal was the result of documented behavioral issues and a pattern of unnecessary operational disruptions. Should you continue to circulate false or unsubstantiated claims regarding Ardencorps' operations, we will pursue legal remedies to protect our reputation and interests. Regards. Logan Ward, ESQ**. Translation: Shut up or we'll bury you. I read it 3 times, then closed the laptop. This was bigger than Tyler. He wasn't acting alone. Someone in corporate was backing him, clearing the path, and putting the weight of the company behind their cover-up. That kind of rot doesn't happen overnight. It spreads through the bones of a place. So I went quiet. I stopped emailing. Stopped logging into anything traceable. I started reading federal safety statutes, memorizing whistleblower protection clauses, combing through BSEE regulations line by line like scripture. I was going to need more than proof. I needed leverage. That's when Jason called. It was just after 11 p.m., and I almost didn't answer. Frank, he said, voice low, can we meet? Where? There's a diner. 20 miles west of Baygrove. Off Highway 27. Real quiet. He hung up before I could respond. An hour later, I pulled into a parking lot full of empty spaces and rusted pickups. Inside, the diner smelled like fryer grease and stale coffee. Jason sat in a booth at the back, hoodie up, eyes twitchy. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. I slid into the seat across from him. You picked a hell of a time to call, I said. I didn't know who else to trust, he replied. I think they're watching the terminals now. I had to go old school. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small black USB drive, placed it on the table between us. What's on it? I asked. Everything I could get, he said. Tyler's directives. Log edits. A video file from the night shift, him telling the crew to bypass the autovalve failsafe during a high-pressure run. And emails. I raised an eyebrow. From where? Corporate. HQ, signed by someone in risk operations. They're instructing him what checks to skip, what inspections to fast-track. It's not just Tyler. This goes all the way up. I stared at the drive for a long moment. It looked harmless, like a keychain. But it weighed more than most men could carry. Why now? I asked. Jason swallowed hard. Because last week, we had a spike. Pressure shot up past redline. The BOP didn't trigger. And instead of reporting it, Tyler ordered the alarm thresholds lowered. The system didn't fail, he redefined failure. My hands clenched under the table. He's going to kill someone, Frank. And when he does, I don't want to be the guy who kept his mouth shut. I took the drive and slid it into my jacket. You did the right thing, I said. Yeah, Jason muttered. Let's hope that matters. He didn't stay for coffee. After he left, I sat in the booth a while longer, staring out the window at the darkened highway. Somewhere out there, men were sleeping above a time bomb. And somewhere else, a team of executives were betting no one would speak up before it blew. I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I drove to New Orleans. The Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement had a regional office there, part enforcement, part bureaucratic graveyard. I didn't go through email. I didn't make an appointment. I showed up in person, requested to speak to someone in field oversight. They gave me Diana Marshall. She looked like she'd been through a dozen disasters and survived every one. Gray streaks in her hair, no-nonsense stare, and a handshake that said she didn't care who I used to be, only what I had in my hand. I gave her the USB. She plugged it in without ceremony, scanned the folder structure, then clicked through the video. She watched Tyler, clear as day, telling a night crew to disable a critical failsafe while drilling under peak pressure. She didn't react. Just turned the screen toward me. How recent? She asked. 4 days ago. She clicked open one of the emails. Read. Scrolled. Read some more. This is enough to trigger a preliminary action, she said. Maybe more. I'll need copies of your other records. And I'll need you to swear a formal statement. Whatever it takes. Diana leaned back in her chair. I've seen a lot of corners cut in my time, Mr. Dalton. Usually it's greed. Sometimes it's stupidity. But this? She tapped the screen. This looks like design. I nodded. That's what scares me. She closed the laptop, locked it in a drawer, and stood. We'll be in touch soon. As I walked out of the building, I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. But for the first time since they'd forced me onto that chopper, I didn't feel alone either. I'd found an ally. And if Tyler thought I was finished, he'd made the same mistake every arrogant man makes before he bleeds. 2 days after my meeting with Diana Marshall, I received a text with no name attached. He knows. They're cleaning house. I didn't need a signature to know it was Jason. No one else would have risked it. Within hours of handing over the USB, the wheels had started turning inside the bureau. Diana had called me late that night, voice steady but with an urgency I hadn't heard before. We've approved an initial inspection, she said. Your video and logs were enough to trigger it. Our man goes out Monday. Who? I asked. Anani Wallace. Mechanical engineer. Veteran inspector. He knows what signs to look for, even if they've tried to patch them. I nodded, alone in my apartment, bathed in the glow of 2 monitors and a spreadsheet of falsified maintenance records. They'll try to cover it, I said. Count on that. Oh, we are, she replied. And cover it they did. I got the next update from Jason late Sunday night. It came through a secure app we both downloaded after the Ardencourt lawyers started circling like sharks. Emergency cleanup all weekend. Engineers rewiring sensors. Erased last month's logs from internal system. Swapped tags. Repainted housing. Still missed one thing. He followed with a second message. PZ-9 still transmitting. They forgot the ghost sensor. I exhaled through my nose. The same unregistered auxiliary sensor I found back in the shaft, the one someone forgot to erase. It had kept a complete internal log of pressure spikes, false reset signals, and diagnostic overrides. And it had never been added to the official network index. Which meant they didn't know it existed. Hold tight, I replied. Help's on the way. Monday morning, Anani Wallace flew to Oceanfall. Unannounced, as planned. A full BSEE clearance letter in hand. And a list of flagged anomalies a mile long. By protocol, I wasn't allowed to go with him. I spent the day in a conference room at the New Orleans field office, waiting alongside Diana and her team while satellite updates from the rig slowly filtered in through secured comms. At 10:13 a.m., we received the first message. Platform condition, visually clean. Logs appear recently modified. Smells like bleach and panic. At 12:45 p.m. Started cross-referencing sensor readings. Multiple discrepancies. PZ-9 verified. Data extraction in progress. At 2:17 p.m., I got a direct message from Jason. He found it. He's got everything. And at 4:52 p.m., Diana's phone rang. I watched her as she answered, listened, then slowly stood from her seat. When she ended the call, she turned to me and said, "They've confirmed 78 violations." I sat back, absorbing the weight of the number. 78. Across safety, maintenance, and reporting. The BOP system alone should have disqualified the platform from continued operation 6 months ago. She walked to the far wall and unlocked a tall cabinet. From inside, she pulled a sealed evidence case and a red-stamped form. "What now?" I asked. "We escalate," she said. "Full federal oversight. Emergency notification to the Department of the Interior. Shutdown. Effective immediately. Oceanfall Platform 4 is no longer authorized to operate." I didn't speak. Just sat there, breathing, trying to remember the last time something this big had actually landed. I'd been fighting for months, hell, maybe years. And now the entire house of cards was about to collapse. Diana leaned over the table, both palms flat on the surface. "You were right, Frank. But this doesn't end with Tyler." I met her eyes. "No. It doesn't." She turned to her assistant. "Prepare the dispatch. Notify the regional director. And get me a line to Interior Enforcement." By nightfall, the shutdown order was official. Oceanfall Platform 4, once the jewel of Ardencor's Gulf operations, was dead in the water. Word traveled fast in the oil world. By morning, the rigs up and down the coast were buzzing. Ardencor stock dipped. Calls were made. Boardrooms burned hot with backdoor panic. Meanwhile, Jason sent me another message, just 2 words. He snapped. Apparently, Tyler had lost it when Wallace refused to sign off on the tampered sensors. He'd screamed at the inspection team, threatened to have them forcibly removed, and locked himself in his office for an hour before finally stepping out, composed, but tight-lipped. The damage was done. The shutdown wasn't quiet. It came with helicopters. Federal agents. Chain of custody evidence kits. Camera teams. And best of all, a full data pull from every onboard system. Even if they'd cleaned the surfaces, the rot was in the foundation. I was asked to provide a technical statement. I didn't hesitate. I walked through each violation, explaining not just the how, but the why the where on the BOP mattered, why forged logs mattered, why moving a decimal point in a pressure limit could kill men who had no say in the math. Anani confirmed everything. Jason sent one final log before he was pulled for off-platform debriefing. He tried to blame us. Said we'd misunderstood instructions. Said we were incompetent. No one bought it. They all saw the video. He attached a clip. Tyler, face flushed with frustration, barking at the night crew. Bypassed the valve. I don't care what Dalton wrote. You've got quotas to hit. It's within tolerance if no one documents the spike. Just do it. His own voice. His own words. The kind of thing that ends careers, and opens courtrooms. Diana watched the clip, then passed it along to the Department of the Interior with one comment. Clear grounds for criminal referral. That night, I stood outside the New Orleans field office, watching the sun slip behind the skyline. The air smelled like salt and diesel, the scent of every morning I'd spent on the rig. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even satisfied. I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Because for the first time, they were on the defensive. The hearing was held in a sterile, windowless room in a federal building in Baton Rouge. No oil company branding here. Just a circular seal from the Department of the Interior and the smell of cold air conditioning and nerves. It wasn't a trial. Not yet. But for men like Tyler Connors, this room was worse than court, because here, no amount of money could shift the facts. No shareholder call could mute what was about to be said on record. No PR firm could sanitize what they were about to show on screen. I sat at the rear of the room beside Diana, her posture rigid but calm. Across from us sat 2 rows of Ardencourt's legal defense, black suits, steel cufflinks, eyes like glass. Tyler was there, too, sitting stiff beside his lawyers. Not cuffed. Not sweating. But tight. Controlled. Like a man who knew the walls were moving in but still held hope for an exit. He didn't look at me. Maybe he couldn't. The chairman of the review panel gavelled the hearing to order and asked Diana to present her team's findings. She stepped up to the podium and delivered a clinical, devastating summary. 78 federal safety violations. Systematic falsification of maintenance logs. Use of substandard and unauthorized equipment. Failure to report high-risk incidents. Disabling of alarm systems during high-pressure operations. Then came the final piece, the video from Jason's USB. It played on a monitor behind the panel, Tyler's voice, his face, his orders. Bypass the valve. I don't care what Dalton wrote. It's within tolerance if no one documents the spike. Silence followed. But just as the weight of that moment began to settle, the lead Ardencourt counsel, Logan Ward, the same one who'd threatened to sue me weeks ago, stood. We object to the inclusion of this footage, he said. We believe the file may have been edited. A murmur swept the room. The panel members glanced at one another. Diana didn't flinch. We had the file authenticated. Ward pressed. Have you analyzed whether any portions were omitted or rearranged for narrative effect? That question was sharper than it sounded. Diana hesitated. And in that hesitation, something shifted in my gut. One of the panel members leaned forward. Ms. Marshall, can your office confirm the footage is entirely unaltered? Diana opened her folder, then looked at me, not as an official, but as a person who didn't want to say what she had to. There is one cut, she said carefully. At the beginning of the file. Approximately 6 seconds missing. The room stilled. Tyler's lawyer seized the opening. So we're now admitting that the most incriminating evidence presented was doctored. I didn't wait. I stood. That cut wasn't done by her team. All eyes turned to me. I turned to face the panel. It was done by someone trying to make sure the man responsible didn't weasel out of it like he always had. Not to fabricate guilt. But to make damn sure people listened. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Dalton, are you saying you edited the file? No, I said. But I know who did. I looked across the room, straight at Jason, who was sitting in the 3rd row, shoulders hunched, face pale. He stood slowly. Shaking. I did, he said. Whispers broke out like a breeze. Jason stepped forward. I trimmed the first few seconds. Tyler was rambling about offshore scheduling. Nothing critical. I wanted to make sure the important part was front and center. I didn't change what he said. I just tightened it. The chairman raised a hand for silence. Mr. Turner, were you aware that altering evidence submitted to a federal review panel, no matter how minor, is a felony offense? Jason swallowed. Yes, sir. His voice cracked. I was just afraid. I've seen these things get swept under the rug. I've seen guys like Tyler walk because someone couldn't prove intent. I thought if I made it clear, undeniable, he couldn't slip through. The chairman leaned back, stone-faced. No one said a word for a long time. Then I spoke. He didn't break the law, I said. What he broke was faith. Because he didn't believe the system would protect him, or anyone else. I turned slowly, eyes sweeping across the room. And that's not his fault. That's the fault of every company that cuts corners, every exec that rubber stamps a safety report without reading it, and every lawyer that treats truth like a chess piece. I looked at the panel. You want justice? Then don't punish the guy who tried too hard to make sure it happened. Punish the man who signed off on a death trap and called it tolerance. For a moment, no one responded. Then the chairman nodded. Noted. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down. Tyler Connors was sentenced to 8 months in federal detention for falsifying safety certifications and obstruction of a federal investigation. Minimal by civilian standards, but enough to brand him for life in the offshore industry. Ardent Core Energy was fined $200 million in federal penalties, with criminal referrals issued for 2 corporate executives connected to the email trail. The company's stock dropped by 34% in 1 week. Oceanfall Platform 4 was permanently decommissioned. They gutted it. Removed the crew housing. Stripped the rig bare. Left it floating like a rusted skeleton out on the horizon, a grave marker made of steel. And me? I didn't go back to Oceanfall. But I didn't go far. A month after the hearings, I took a position with Deepwell Marine, a smaller company with a bigger conscience. They offered me the role of Regional Director of Safety Operations, with full authority to build a compliance division from the ground up. My first hires were easy. Anani Wallace, the quiet engineer who'd caught what no one else did. Jason Turner, who risked everything to do what was right, even if he stumbled on the way. And 3 others from Oceanfall, men and women who'd sent me quiet messages during the darkest weeks. Not out loud. But they saw. They cared. They just needed a place where it was safe to speak. On my first day, I walked into the training room for the new batch of recruits. Fresh faces. Young. Sharp-eyed. Some curious. Some skeptical. All of them watching me closely. No PowerPoint. No pie charts. Just me, standing at the front. My name's Frank Dalton, I said. For 22 years, I worked on rigs just like the one we're building here. I've seen the best operations, and the worst cover-ups. I paused. Took a breath. And I learned something simple. Out here, there are no small mistakes. There's only the choice to speak, or stay silent. They leaned in. Sometimes you'll be the only one raising your hand. Sometimes you'll get fired for doing the right thing. But I promise you, truth echoes louder than any lie if you hold it long enough. I looked around the room. There was a time I thought I was fighting alone. But I was wrong. You're here now. And that means something. I smiled. Welcome to the front line. It's easy to forget that most disasters don't start with explosions. They start with compromises. With someone calling a safety valve optional. With a number getting rounded up. With a signature scribbled fast on a form no one double-checked. But if this fight taught me anything, it's this. When principle becomes inconvenient, disaster becomes inevitable. But even a lone voice, held firm, can tear down a fortress built on lies. And sometimes, that voice becomes a chorus. And that chorus becomes change.